What if you're grieving something that was actually good? A different kind of grief for a different kind of relationship with food. A few years back, I wrote a blog post about the 7 stages of grief and how giving up sugar and flour felt surprisingly like losing someone. I used the ex-husband analogy. Plenty of bad memories, plenty of pain, and, if I'm honest, not something I actually wanted back. That post resonated with a lot of people, and it still does. But lately, I've been hearing from a different kind of person, someone who doesn't relate to the ex husband metaphor at all. Someone who says, but I genuinely love food. I grew up with parents who treated dining as a cultural event. I know every great restaurant in 3 cities. Food isn't my problem. It's one of the best things in my life. And they're not wrong, which is exactly what makes this grief so much harder to navigate. 2 kinds of grief. When I wrote that original post, I was grieving a relationship that had always been painful. Yes, there were good memories woven in, but the overwhelming truth was that sugar and flour had been hurting me for decades. The grief had an undercurrent of relief. What I'm describing now is different. This is the grief of someone who needs to change their relationship with food, not because food was always the enemy, but because somewhere along the way, the relationship got complicated. And untangling complicated from good is some of the most delicate work there is. Maybe that someone is you. If the original 7 stages of grief was like leaving a difficult marriage, this one is closer to leaving a city you genuinely loved because you have to. You're not escaping, you're losing something real. Do you recognize yourself here? See if any of this lands for you. You grew up in a household where food was culture. Parents who cooked with care and who knew which restaurant in town had the best bouillabaisse, or who marked every important occasion with a particular dish. Meals weren't just fuel, they were love, celebration, belonging, and identity all on one plate. As an adult, you carry this forward with pride. You are the person in the friend group who knows where to eat. You've traveled for food. You've spent real thought, real time, and real money choosing meals that delight you. Rich sauces, specialty ingredients, complex, layered flavors that take skill to create and attention to appreciate. And you are genuinely in love. So when someone starts talking about food dysfunction and the neuroscience of what ultra-processed substances do to our brain reward circuitry, you listen politely and then you say something like, but that's not me. I don't eat garbage. I eat beautifully. And often you're right about that part. The question isn't whether the food is beautiful. The question isn't whether the food is beautiful. The question is what's doing the eating. The parts that are playing. If you know anything about internal family systems, the idea that we're each made up of different parts with different needs, fears, and histories, this is where the foodie story gets really interesting. There's a part I call the connoisseur. This is the part that genuinely loves the sensory experience of an extraordinary meal. The ritual of choosing a restaurant, the pleasure of being someone who knows. This part is real, it has legitimate joy, and it deserves to be honored. I am not here to evict the connoisseur. Then there's the inheritor, the part that carries the family legacy. When you order the way your mother ordered or seek out the kind of meal your father savored on special occasions, you're not just eating. You're staying connected to people you love or once loved or are still trying to reach. The neural pathways here weren't built in trauma. They were built in warmth, which makes them, if anything, even more deeply wired. There's the identity keeper, the part that knows I'm a foodie. It's not just a preference. It's a self-concept. It's how you show up in the world, how you connect with friends, how you travel, how you celebrate. Ask this part to give that up, and you're asking it to lose a piece of who it is. That's not nothing. That's grief. And this is the part worth getting really curious about. There may be other parts quietly borrowing the connoisseur's apron. The stress responder who has learned that a spectacular dinner is how you decompress after a brutal week. The alarmed aloneness navigator who uses a long restaurant meal to fill an evening that might otherwise feel too quiet. The reward hunter who needs the dopamine hit of anticipating, choosing, and consuming something truly exceptional. Here's the uncomfortable truth: the brain's reward circuitry doesn't actually distinguish between a gas station brownie and a handmade truffle pasta with 4 cheeses at a celebrated restaurant. The subconscious gut-brain pathways that drive seeking, craving, and return are running in both cases, responding to sugar, fat, salt, and sensory complexity, whether or not the experience is sophisticated. The connoisseur is real, and it may also be providing excellent cover for parts that have their own agenda, ones worth getting curious about. The stages of this particular grief. Grief is grief, but the texture of it changes depending on what you're grieving. Here's how I see this specific journey moving. Stage 0, the defended pleasure. I don't have a problem. I have taste. This is the stage before the original 7 even begin. The connoisseur is firmly in charge. The idea that anything about your relationship with food needs examining feels absurd, even slightly insulting. This isn't denial in the painful sense. It's the very reasonable position of someone who hasn't yet been given a framework that makes their experience visible. Stage 1, the uncomfortable recognition. Something shifts. Maybe it's a health marker. Maybe it's a moment of noticing you were chasing the next bite before finishing the one in your mouth. Maybe it's reading something, possibly even this, and feeling an unexpected pang of recognition. This is not yet grief. It's the moment before grief, when you realize something may need to change and you don't want it to. Stage 2, anger and bargaining, often simultaneously. I'm not giving up the one thing that brings me real joy. What's the point of being healthy if life is gray and tasteless? And right alongside it, okay, what if I just do this on weekdays? What if I travel differently? What if I keep the restaurants but change how I order? The bargaining here isn't weakness, it's intelligence. The system is trying to find a way to keep what matters while responding to what it's learned. This is worth taking seriously, not rushing past. There may be real answers in the bargaining. Stage 3, the magnitude depression. This is the hardest stage and the one most likely to end the journey prematurely. You try making changes, and the world goes flat. Saturday nights feel pointless. Travel sounds exhausting. Social gatherings become something to get through rather than anticipate. The joy you feared losing has, in fact, gone quiet. This is where well-meaning people say things like, "You'll find new joys. Cooking healthy food can be amazing." And you go quiet because no, actually, a virtuous grain bowl does not feel like grief equivalent joy. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the same way. What I said in my original post still applies here. Do not be talked out of this stage by well-meaning outsiders. The magnitude of this loss is real. It needs to be witnessed, not solved. What's also true biologically is that this flatness has a name. When any high stimulation dopamine source is removed or reduced, the brain goes through a period of lowered baseline reward sensitivity. Things that used to feel pleasurable feel muted. This is temporary. It's neurological recalibration, not a permanent sentence, but in the middle of it, it doesn't feel temporary. It feels like proof. Stage 4, the question that actually needs answering. If I don't have these delicacies anymore, where is the joy in my life? This question deserves to be taken completely seriously, not reframed away, not immediately answered with a list of alternatives. It needs to be resonated with first, because embedded in it is a legitimate fear. The joy has been scarce outside of this. A real history that food has been genuinely pleasurable and connecting. A biological truth that the reward system is well trained on this specific stimulus, and possibly an unexamined assumption worth gently surfacing that the food is where the joy actually lives. But what if it was never fully the food? What if the joy lived in the ritual, the choosing, the anticipating, the gathering, the conversation over the table? In the aesthetic, the beauty of a beautifully plated dish, the atmosphere of a room you love, in the connection, the shared experience with people who matter. These things are not stored in the sauce. They can be accessed differently. Stage 5, the mapping. This is where it gets interesting. This is the reconstruction stage, and it's not about finding substitute pleasures. It's about mapping what actually lit you up and discovering how much of it travels. Is it the sensory complexity you love? There is extraordinary sensory complexity in the world that doesn't end with a dopamine crash. Music, art, nature, fragrance, movement. The brain that can distinguish the nuance in a layered sauce can also learn to find deep pleasure in the layered quality of a piece of music or a walk through a landscape that changes every few steps. Is it the ritual you love? The choosing, the anticipating, the research, the gathering. Those rituals can be rebuilt around different centers. Travel for landscape instead of restaurant. Gather friends around a different kind of shared experience. Bring the same intentionality to creating an evening that you once brought to a menu. Is it the connection to your parents you love? That is the most tender thing. And it may be worth sitting with, genuinely sitting with, whether there are other ways to carry them with you. Their voices, their stories, the things they loved that had nothing to do with food. Stage 5B, because why not? The one that changes everything, a note on your taste buds. Here's the piece of this I find genuinely thrilling and a little bit ironic. The very thing the connoisseur fears losing, that capacity for deep sensory pleasure, that ability to taste complexity and nuance, has actually been partially suppressed by the NF, not food, substances that ride alongside the gourmet experiences. Here's the science. Chronic exposure to the engineered sweetness and flavor intensity of ultra-processed substances causes your taste receptor cells to literally pull receptors back from their surface and turn down the signal. Not because you've lost sensitivity, but because your hardware was protecting itself from being overwhelmed. It's a brilliant adaptive response, and it costs you something you probably didn't know you were paying. The food you thought was expanding your pleasure has been quietly narrowing it. Now, here's the part that stopped me mid-bite. Your taste receptor cells have a built-in expiration date. They die and regenerate constantly. The whole cycle takes roughly 10 to 14 days, which means that around 10 to 14 days stepping away from NF, not food, you've grown an entirely new generation of taste cells that have never been exposed to engineered intensity. They come in fresh, at full sensitivity. And suddenly, the roasted carrot tastes like caramel, like something a good restaurant would charge $22 for. The fresh strawberry is almost overwhelming in its sweetness. The marinated artichoke heart has layers you never noticed before. This isn't settling. This isn't consolation food. This is your connoisseur, the part of you that genuinely, deeply loves flavor, finally getting what it always wanted, undistorted access to what real food actually tastes like. The grief reframed. You're not losing your palate, you're recovering it. Stage 6, the both and arrival. Here's what I want to be clear about. For many people who identify as foodies, the answer is not complete abstinence from rich food experiences. It may never be, and that's okay. My work has always been both and, not either or. The arrival isn't, I never go to restaurants anymore. The arrival looks more like, I can go to extraordinary restaurants and be genuinely present for the experience, tasting what's in my mouth rather than chasing the next bite. I can honor my family's love of food while also noticing when I'm eating my parents' grief or loneliness along with the sauce. I can be a connoisseur and also be honest about when the stress responder has borrowed the connoisseur's coat. The goal isn't to stop being a foodie. It's to become a more conscious one, to know the difference between choosing this meal and being driven to it. And perhaps the most surprising gift of all, to discover that as your taste receptors recalibrate, the real food you once dismissed as ordinary becomes anything but. The question worth bringing into your next meal, not as a test, not as self surveillance, but as gentle curiosity. Am I here for this meal? Or am I somewhere else using this meal to get there? If you're present, savoring, noticing, genuinely delighted, that's the connoisseur. Welcome. Stay as long as you like. If you're somewhere else, chasing, numbing, feeling something, proving something, that's worth knowing. Not to shame yourself, just to know. Because you deserve the actual joy, not the imitation of it. A note on the grief itself. If you're in the middle of this, if the thought of changing your relationship with food makes you feel something close to bereavement, I want you to know that the grief is real. It's not overdramatic. It's not proof that you're too attached. It's proof that what you had mattered to you. And grief, honored properly, doesn't close doors. It clears the way for something more honest, something that might, in time, surprise you. You were never broken. You were biological, and you were someone who loved something deeply. That's not a flaw. That's the beginning of understanding. Sonia.